Hello, this is Ruth Trok from the Bathhouse Ceramic Studio at Braddock Carnegie Library. I'm going to do a video today on making ceramic spoons. And the reason we chose this topic was it's something that you can do at home if you have clay. You don't need any real special tools, mostly your hands. And a lot of times things that you can find at home if you don't have any clay tools. So in the interest of full disclosure, I've never made a video before, so this is all new to me. And I feel like in these times with the social distancing, we're all kind of doing things differently than we've ever done them before. So here I am, way out of my comfort zone in my home, and we're going to make some spoons today. So the first thing we're going to do is make a really simple spoon, just kind of something that you can pull and pinch together. It's pretty easy. So I'm going to take a lump of clay. I kind of like starting with a piece of clay that is, you know, kind of already in a cylindrical shape, sort of roughly, but you don't absolutely need to do that. The first time I tried to make a spoon, I just grabbed a hunk of clay and started pinching and pulling until I kind of got what I wanted. And so, you know, as you kind of play around with it, you'll find the techniques that work for you. So I'm kind of narrowing down this section where the handle will be. And what I like to do at that point, honestly, is pull it almost like I were pulling the handle on a mug. To me, that's just the quickest and easiest way to get a nice, fairly uniform, fairly smooth handle. At this point, I'm just going to leave it. We'll play with it later. We're just going to work now more on the bowl of the spoon. So what I like to do here is kind of just like roughly pat it and shape it into a spoon shape. And that kind of depends on what you're looking for. You're looking for something that's more rounded, something more elongated. It's really up to you. You can kind of make this whatever you want it to be. So you're going to pinch the bowl, just really like a pinch pot. Put your thumb in the middle and open up a hole, and then just kind of start pinching the walls. As you see places where maybe it's cracking, you can kind of clean it up. Use a little bit more water if you need it. This is pretty wet, so I won't be adding any water most likely, but if you need to, you certainly can. And you want to get it to the point where the bowl is about the depth that you want it, and the wall thickness is about where you want it. You can work on making this really uniform on the top if you want to. I personally will probably spend a fair amount of time playing around with this afterwards because, you know, I'm always seeing things that I'd like to fix or like to change. That being said, a lot of people really love having the, you know, the finger marks of the maker on their clay. So it's kind of nice. You can smooth off the back here, or you can leave those kind of marks. I know what really cool thing is, you know, when you're done making this and you're using it someday, you kind of have the memory of what you were feeling, what you were thinking, what was going on at the time that you made this item. And it's kind of one of the cool things about making things in clay is that oftentimes are things that we use. And so, you know, they kind of reflect feelings and thoughts and times that we had in our lives. So I kind of like at this point to like refine this transition a little bit, make it a little bit smoother, a little bit narrower here. I kind of like to take some of the thickness out of it right there, but that's really up to you how you want it to look. Some people, you know, want to have their pinch marks on here. You can change the angle that the handle sits at. I like to put a little bit of a flat area here where I will eventually put a hole so I can hang the spoon up. You may want to you can put a stamp in it, add some visual interest, or you can do something on the handle. A lot of times I will use things that I have around the house. I like to use a knitting needle a lot when I make things with clay. I find that the rigidity of it, but it is nice, but it has a little bit of a softness at the tip. It's not super pointy. So you can do some kind of interesting and cool things with that, you know, to add some visual interest to something, or you can use it actually to poke a hole in something. One of the many tools that you can find around the house that you can use. Now at this point, you're going to want to let this dry a little bit before you do much else with it. Eventually, you're probably going to want to refine it a little bit. You may want to, as it kind of sits on the board, it's going to get flat here, And so you may want to, as it gets a little closer to leather hard, not completely leather hard, kind of take some time to push that out again and smooth that out. But when you do let it dry, a lot of times you're going to want to have a little bit of an offset here to make it function a little bit better. And that is one of the cool things about ceramic pieces as well, is that they're functional. So if you want that, you're going to have to lay something underneath that to kind of hold that in place. You can use the handle of a wooden spoon, one of your clay tools, anything that kind of allows it to dry in that position with that little bit of a bend in it there. So I'm going to move this over here, take that with me, and let that dry a little bit. And we'll look at another type of spoon that we can make. A really simple thing that you can do is make one using a blank. So I cut a piece of paper into a pattern here. You can trace it onto a slab. You can roll out a slab. You don't have a slab roller obviously in your house. You can roll out a slab using a tool like this. You could use a rolling pin. You could use a dowel. Anything that's round and uniform in thickness. Honestly, a lot of times I will start by just kind of pressing it down into a relatively flat space or shape or piece, and then just kind of like slap it down a little bit on here. And as you do that, it's going to thin it out a little bit. It's going to smooth it on the back, and it also compresses the clay, I think, a little bit, which is a good thing when you're doing anything. And then at that point, you would consider, taking something and rolling it to make sure that you've got a relatively uniform and smooth thickness. You can smooth it out with your fingers or with a rib, and then you can cut your blank out of it. But I have one here that's already pre-cut, and so you want to kind of smooth out these edges. You don't want to have, really rough or sharp edges on something like this. It's an interesting technique. I kind of personally like forming them myself by hand, but it's kind of neat to have, kind of the uniformity of something that's all the same size and shape. Sometimes that's something you might want. The little blank kind of reminds me of the little wooden spoons that used to be in the ice cream cups when I was a kid, and I know I'm dating myself, but whatever. So at this point you're going to want to form the bowl, and you need to use something that is not super smooth. If you're using something that's really smooth, the clay is going to stick to it and you're never going to get it off. This has become one of my favorite things. It's from my mortar and pestle in my kitchen. So yes, I am going to have clay on it, but I can clean it off, I think. Wood works better, it works well, maybe not better than this, but better than something that's super smooth. I've had some luck with the back of a wooden spoon. I have this little thing that was my great aunt's, and it was used to darn socks, and the end of it's not real smooth and shiny, and so I can sometimes use that as well. No, I do not darn socks, but it's kind of interesting to think of a time when people did. So I kind of love that tool, even if I don't use it for clay. So anyway, we've got kind of the bowl formed here, and we'll take some time, or you would if you were really working on it, to clean up this edge. I'm not going to really do a whole lot because, just time constraints here, but that formed a really nice uniform little bowl. A lot of times with this one, I'll want to pinch it in a little bit to kind of create a little groove there. That creates kind of a nice look. I also think with this one that you might want to have that little bit of an offset there. So when you let it dry, you're going to go ahead and put something underneath it, whether it's the handle of something or just something that you can allow to dry in that position. Once again, as it gets closer to being leather hard, you're going to want to pick it up and kind of fix anything that you're not happy with in terms of edges or flat spots on the back here of the bowl to get it to kind of where you want it to be. You can also put some decorative detail there, maybe a stamp, or it might be another topic for another video, another time and place, is making our own stamps. It's a really fun thing to do. Once again, something that you can do at home. These things will ultimately need to be fired, but right now you can make them, and hopefully as we get back to a little bit more of a normal kind of place, we can bring these things in and fire them at a later date. So the next one I want to make is something similar to this guy. So this guy has a kind of a deep bowl, And this handle is big and chunky, and I kind of like that. It's kind of fun, but it's also would be very heavy if you formed it out of a solid piece. So this handle is actually hollow. So we're going to kind of give this a try, and I'm going to kind of divide this into a couple of different sections. So this section here is going to be the bowl, and this section here is going to be that chunky elongated handle. And now I'm going to roll it a little bit to try to kind of pull that handle into at least closer to the shape that we want it. And because the end we want to be a little more pointed and the middle to be a little more chubby. So I'll kind of get it to that place. And then at this point, we're going to cut it in half at the handle. Okay? So I'm just going to take this here and cut this. Try to keep it relatively uniform. There might be better ways to do that than the way I just did it. Try to keep it flat and try to keep it uniform, because eventually we're going to end up putting these things back together. So the next thing I'm going to do is form the bowl of the spoon. Once again, like a pinch pot. Stick your front thumb in there and form it the way you want it. I like this one kind of deep and round. I just kind of like the way it looks, the way it's kind of chunky at the handle, and the bowl is big and deep and round like that. Almost ladle-like in some ways. And so I'm going to go ahead and pinch it that way. If you have some places where you're seeing some cracking, this piece of clay is a little drier. You want to kind of clean that up as you go as much as possible. You'll be able to fix it to some extent later, but when I see cracking like that, I like to just kind of clean it up as I'm working on it. So I'm going to kind of pinch this into a bowl. I found that as I'm working with clay and making things during this time that I'm home a lot and really trying to stay home, trying to follow the directives and be safe here, this is a way that I can kind of do something that changes my focus, gives me a chance to focus on something creative, on making something. It's a way that I can kind of escape a little bit in a healthy way and do something and make something and create something. And I encourage you, if you have a chance to grab a piece of clay, or if you don't have clay, to find a way to create, kind of find a way to make things, because I think that it's really therapeutic right now in these times when we're all kind of feeling the stress. So anyway, got a little bit of a bowl here. I will probably, as I'm working on it later, refine this a little bit, but kind of got a nice deep round bowl. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make a hole in this, and rather than just dig my thumb in there, I found it's helpful to kind of start the hole with something. I'm using the end of a paintbrush, another tool that has kind of a longer end, but it's kind of blunt there, it's not real sharp. And then I'm going to go in here with my thumb and do the same thing. We're going to pinch this, make the walls as thin as we need to make them. You don't want them too thin, because when you try to put this together, that's going to make it complicated. So you don't want the walls to be super thin, but try to make this kind of a little bit longer piece where it's narrow at one end, a little bit bigger at the other end. And just kind of pinch it, smooth the edge so that you've got a flat, smooth edge as much as possible. This is probably the second or the third time that I've tried to work on this video, and every time something happens, my dog starts to make a whole lot of noise or something. And ironically, this is the, probably the least successful time I've made this spoon. So, but, we're going to go with it. So you've got something here that's relatively flat there, and it's got a decent amount of wall thickness there, and it has that shape. I'm going to set that down. I'm going to do the same thing with the other piece. Poke a hole in it to start. Take that hole pretty close down here. I want to leave this part somewhat, not hollow right in there, but pretty close. And then get your thumb in there. Do the same thing. Pinch it and get it into the shape that you want. the important thing here is that as you work this, eventually it needs to be about the same diameter as this piece there, because we're going to put them together. And when we put them together, it's a lot easier if they're approximately the same diameter. So, to make that a little bit wider, this is going to be a real chunky one, more so than my last one. Okay, so that's going to work, because it's pretty close. If you kind of roll it around, you can see that the diameter is pretty close. So now we're going to scratch and slip this. When you score and slip, you want to make sure you do a really good job, because, you know, putting this together, this is going to be, you know, potentially a weak point if you don't do a great job putting it together. So you want to definitely score and slip very thoroughly. So I'm going to add some slip to these sections here. Do this with a paintbrush. I have a tendency to just kind of use my finger when I can. And I'm going to put this handle together. And I'm going to kind of go around and with my thumb as best I'm able, kind of smooth this into place. And you'll notice that that is a little bit of a tricky spot, because normally when you're pushing something together, you've got the ability to go in from the other side and push against the area where you're smoothing it. And because this is hollow, that's not possible. Well, what we're going to do to solve that is also going to solve another problem. So if we put this in the kiln right now, hollow, we're going to have a problem. So we need to poke a hole in this anyway in order to be able to safely fire it. So what I'm going to do, now that I've got it somewhat together, is I'm going to take the end of this paintbrush and I'm going to poke a hole right through here, because that will eventually be, you know, an area where you could maybe hang it. And then I'm going to take and poke a hole right down in there. Okay, so that's going to solve two problems. One is that we can't fire this thing without a hole in it, so now it puts a hole there, and it gives me something that I can push against. I can put this paintbrush in here, and I can kind of put it in the location that I'm smoothing and give myself something that I can smooth against as I'm working around. Now this does take some time, and you're probably going to want to put a fair amount more time into it than I'm doing right now. So I'm going to not take this to its full completion, because otherwise this video would be longish. So what I'm going to do is kind of stop at this point, but what you're going to want to do is continue to go around, make sure this is really well put together. And then when you're done, you can kind of clean up this hole, make it look a little nicer here on the outside, but make absolutely sure that there's still a clear hole that goes down into this vessel here, this body that's hollow. Because once again, we cannot fire something that's hollow that does not have some kind of a hole in it. So, like I said, that kind of kills two birds with one stone. Then you can smooth this, you can shape it. As it dries a little bit, you'll have an easier time shaping it. On this one, I put a little bit of a groove here that I kind of liked. I like the way this handle kind of pinched in there. With this one, I really do like having a really strong angle on the spoon. I like that, you know, if you have this strong angle, I just kind of like the way it balances, and I like the way it looks, and I like the way it feels in my hand. And that's a very personal thing, how how a spoon feels to you. But it's definitely something to consider as you're making something. So, you know, as you're working on it, feel it, touch it, and get an idea of, you know, how you enjoy the way it feels. So in order to have that strong angle, you're definitely going to need to put something underneath it. And so you can find something in your house. I'm just using this for now. Let it dry, not completely. Wait till it's, not quite leather hard. And then you may want to flip it over, and you'll see you'll have this little bit of flat spot that you'll be able to, at that time, typically you'll be able to kind of like push that out a little smooth it out so you don't end up with that flat spot. I like when they're really nice and rounded and not flat like that. But this is another type of a spoon that you can make. It's really fun, and I think it would also be functional. Like I said, I do like the way it feels in my hand, and so I'm looking forward to seeing how well these work as I use them. So another thing that I kind of played around with was some double-ended spoons. Basically formed them just like we did the first one, but just leave a kind of a clump on the other end so that you can make two ends. If you wanted to play around with the idea of trying to have something that was almost a measuring spoon, you'd really have to take into account the shrinkage on the clay, and that would be super tricky, but it might be fun to mess around with sometime to just kind of get a feel for, could you make something that actually could be used for measuring, or are you just going to have to settle with something that's just kind of a fun little tool that you have. I also played around with making a scoop, and really the difference between making a scoop and making a spoon, and I won't really necessarily complete one here probably, is that you're going to want to really get some depth there, but as you work it here, you want to have the end of it fairly thin and fairly flat. So you're going to kind of pull it until you get to a place where it's relatively thin and relatively flat. So you're going to make the bowl a little bit different than you would for a scoop, than you would for a spoon. And then when you're done kind of getting it the way you want to, like I said, I like to get some real depth here because you want it to be able to hold something, but you want it to be thinner there because as you scoop into something, you want to have a sharper edge there. And when you get it to where you're happy with it, then you can kind of like pinch that in a little bit to give it kind of a nice type of classic scoop shape, and you'll have a scoop. I didn't really finish the handle on this one, but you could finish it any way you want. Different thicknesses, different lengths, different sizes. It's a lot of fun to play with. So these are kind of just some ideas. There's a lot of other stuff out there that you can do in terms of making spoons and scoops and ladles. I would encourage you to grab some clay and give it a shot if you have any clay. Hopefully we'll get to a place where we'll be able to get some clay a little more readily. But in the meantime, I just thought this would be fun to share with you guys. One thought when we're going to fire these is we are not going to be able to glaze the back here of these spoons because they're going to be laying on the kiln shelf, and of course we can't have glaze there. We will be able to glaze the bowl and potentially maybe the lip here and maybe even a little something along here, but we're going to need to stay away from this area. So you're going to have, basically raw unglazed clay here. Might want to consider burnishing these to give you a really smooth surface. And that might be a topic for another video at some point. If you've never really done that, it might be kind of fun to play around with that, and it gives you a really nice smooth surface when you're working with clay, and might be something to fool around with. So looking forward to seeing all of you again, hopefully sooner than later, and just excited to be able to present these videos to you guys. If you are able to make anything, we'd love to see it. Even if it's not in clay, if you're making something else, it would be fun to just see what people are doing out there right now and kind of reconnect with the friends that we've been working with all over the years here. So feel free to get in touch with us. We'd love to see what you're doing, see what you're working on. Also, if you have any questions. So we'll be in touch. Stay safe and stay well.